So welcome. My name is Tina Mulrooney. Most of you know me already, and I work here at the Community Sector Council, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm in the St. John's location, and we're very, very pleased to have Jan Dix, HR expert, here with us today to answer your burning HR questions. And no question is too silly. I do want to introduce you first to Jan. Jan Dix actually has greater than 20 years of HR experience in the business realm. She's actually a consultant and an organizational coach. She's currently working at Conversant Workplace Solutions, which is her organization. She acts as a consultant and a coach, and during the last 20 years, she's done a bit of everything. So she's done consulting and worked in other organizations as well. So she's got a broad range of experience and expertise, and we're so pleased to have her here today. So we have an hour this morning. It's 10:03. We do promise that we will get you out of here by 11. This morning, we don't have a high attendance, so it's a great opportunity for everyone to send through their questions in the question box. I do want to let you know that if you submitted a question in the registration, we do have that question, and we will be going through that. But if there are any other questions that come through as we go on, it's a great opportunity because Jan is all ours for a full hour. So we do invite you to submit those questions. And I just wanted to say, right now I'm going to hand it over to Jan Dix. Thank you, Jan, for coming in today and doing this for us. We're very grateful. While Jan is doing her introduction, I do ask that you take some time to think about which area of human resources causes you the biggest problems or issues in your nonprofit organization or your field of work within a nonprofit. All right, so I'm handing it over there now to Jan. Sit back and enjoy. No one's going to be heard on this. It's just going to simply be through the text box and Jan's voice. Just want to let you know we are recording. So I also want to remind people that we don't want any identifying information put in the questions, and we're going to keep it generic as well. So even if you have been, a little explanatory in your question, we're going to make sure we, protect everyone's privacy and not identify where or what organization the question came from. So I'm handing it over now to Jan, and enjoy your morning.
Thank you so much, Tina, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning and have the opportunity to spend this time with you and address your questions about human resources. As Tina said, I've been in this business a long time. Actually, it's probably longer than 20 years, but I don't care to admit that. I have had the opportunity, though, to work, as she said, in a wide variety of organizations and with a wide variety of people. And let me tell you, right out of the starting gate, human resources is hard. There's no black and white answers that apply in all situations and for all people. And even this morning, as we are addressing some of your questions without and we're going to do that as generically as possible. But even across the board, then there could be complicating factors in your organization that would change some of the way in which you would need to approach things. And the fact that human resources is hard comes from the fact that we are very different and we're dealing with people. That makes us and the workplace exciting, and an exciting, differences are a positive. How boring life would be if we were all the same. At the same time, the complexities and differences makes us often difficult to deal with, difficult to manage, difficult to understand, difficult to satisfy, as people who are dealing with other people in any organization often find. And very early on in my career, there's more awareness now, but in the early stages, people would say to me, we don't need human resources. It's only people. And everybody knows how to deal with people. Hello? Oh, when you're talking about an individual's livelihood, their job, you are dealing with a matter that occupies 1/3 of their lives, and that's complicated. It's hard, and the only difference truly between small and large organizations is that large organizations have more help, but they have the same issues. So let's get started and try and unravel some of the complexity. There are 5 areas, and I think you can see those on your screen, that I identified as fundamental principles of human resources. When Tina and I were putting this presentation together, these were the ones that jumped out at me. Now, there may be others, but most of the challenges can fall under one or more of these topics. Starting with communications. Communications is critical in any organization. And I have not seen one yet that does it as much as it needs to and as well as it needs to. It's an ongoing, perpetual problem. But each organization must strive to create avenues of communications down, across, and up the organization. Otherwise, they're going to be in situations where they will have tremendous HR complications arising simply because people have not been communicated to. And they will make assumptions if they don't understand. The second point, and as we go through the morning, we'll come back to some of these, but the second point is clarity. Employees need to understand what's expected of them, and they need to know the expectations of your organization. What are the norms of your organization? What constitutes good performance? What is not acceptable performance? If they don't have clarity, then you will also have a lot of problems, because people who are confused don't produce. They don't understand when they're on the right track and when they're on the wrong track. There's a significant amount of research that looks at onboarding, we call, or the probationary period in organizations. And the probationary period is the point in time when lack of clarity has the most effect, because people are starting off in the organization, they're insecure, they're uncomfortable, and they need structure and understanding. The third point is openness. Now, many organizations don't want to share all of their information with everybody in their organization, and that's quite understandable. But the more open and upfront you can be in your organization, the more you can share, the more you can help people understand what your goals and objectives are, where you are in meeting these goals and objectives, how do they fit into those goals and objectives, and keep them abreast of what's happening, the better off you're going to be. People will tend to fill a vacuum of lack of knowledge. And when they fill that vacuum, they can get into things like gossiping, bickering with each other, backbiting other employees. If they're insecure about whether or not their job is going to last, their income is going to remain as it is, that creates a lot of insecurity and screams out for them to develop stories of their own. The fourth area is recognition and support. People want to be acknowledged. If they're doing a good job, tell them they're doing a good job. If they help a coworker, make a big deal about it. Recognize them for their achievements, and they will engage with your organization. When they are on a limb, maybe doing something they haven't done before, support them. Find ways to recognize the people who work for you. Give them a sense of, feeling good about what they're doing, and they will engage. They will engage much better way. And finally, fairness and equity. People want to be treated fairly. That's a universal concept. It's not only in any one organization or another or only one country. People want a sense of fairness, and they evaluate everything that goes on as to whether or not it's fair. And once they assume they are not being treated fairly, then that creates its own host of problems. If you show favoritism without rational reason, other than maybe you like one person better than the other, or they're easier to communicate with, you can create a whole host of problems that you don't want and you needn't have. Equity, by the way, is not necessarily equal. Equity is being fair to an employee or giving them an equal playing field. Sometimes that means treating people differently. And that is a concept that if you're working with people who are new immigrants or maybe require extra help in the organization, in order to be fair to them, they need additional supports. The same would apply if you're accommodating someone because of a disability of some kind. So equity does not mean strictly equality. Equity means creating an equal playing field in your organization. So those 5 points, I'm sure, will come back to us as we're going forward. Now, of these 5 principles, I want to tell you that the most critical, according to the literature, is communications and perceived lack of fairness. And if you are having major issues in human resources in your organization, look at your communications tools and your policies and procedures. Are they fair and equitable? Do your employees know how your decisions are being made? Do they know what's expected of them? And you may find that if you tighten up your communications and your policies, and people understand what, where decision making comes from, that you can address things before they happen. So with that brief introduction, I'll pass you back to Tina, and we can start looking at some questions.
Sure. Excellent. Thanks, Jan, for that great introduction. We're going to jump right in there now, and I'm going to just check the question box to make sure everything is going fabulous. There's a hi, Jan, and we've actually got another question, so that's great. So we will get to that in due time. We're going to quickly start now with the first question that came in on the registration form. So the first question is, what can I ask of a fundraiser? Can they work on a partial commission basis up to a limit of salary? So I'm going to hand it over to Jan now to answer this one for you, but it's a fabulous question.
Yes, it is a great question. And essentially, what I'm assuming the individual is, or the interview, or the person is asking is, what kind of a compensation structure can you use in fundraising to motivate the fundraiser? It's a complex question because a couple of things play into this. Are there policies in your organization that allow you to compensate fundraisers off a salary scale or on a different type of model. Are there any ethical issues? Are there any issues that might come from your stakeholder group as to how you are managing compensation in this way? Essentially, and it's more of a broader policy question than it is an HR question, because from an HR perspective, you're looking at, you can compensate people on a partial, on a method of partial recognition of the work that they do. So if you provide a base salary to an individual, you can do a partial compensation that's not that's above and beyond that salary, but you have to provide a salary that is at least equivalent to the minimum wage. But then going back to the 5 points I noted earlier, what about the question of fairness? If you have somebody out there who's raising money for the organization, but in order to raise that money, the people in your organization all have to come together and put that event together, for instance. The fundraiser may create the event, may run the event, etc. But what about the other people in the organization who may not be compensated on the basis of how much is earned, but are, on a basic salary? Will there be any questions of fairness? So it's a complex question. I would first of all, in dealing with it, I would first of all talk to my governance board, whether it's a committee or a board of directors or whatever. What are their views? Look at the ethics around fundraising. There may be issues that I'm not aware of. And you could, as I said, you can create a partial compensation scheme that is related to the results that somebody earns. So, for your second question.
All right, thanks very much, Jan. The second question that we have here is, can I reprimand an employee who I know has mentioned confidential information about a colleague, not a client, outside the office?
And again, this is an excellent question because it depends on the nature of the information that was shared and on the organization's policy on confidentiality. At a minimum, sharing confidential information that if that individual knows that information should not be shared, sharing that outside the organization is a breach of professional etiquette, or a breach of professional ethics, actually. And so that is the minimum standard. It's a breach of professional ethics. If it is highly confidential information that will do harm to that individual or to the organization, then, that creates a higher standard. Yes, you can reprimand an employee, but I'd first of all start off from the point of, was this intended as malicious? Was it intended to benefit that employee? Was it gossip? What was the nature of the information that was being shared? Did that employee know that the information was to be held in confidence? Does the organization have any policies about confidentiality and privacy? And based on that, you would determine the degree of reprimand that that employee would receive. But at a minimum, it warrants a conversation with that person to talk about professional ethics and a training across your organization to ensure that people understand what information has to be held in confidence.
Excellent. Thanks, Jan. I've got a question there that came in this morning. What forms do I need to set up a new employee for a new organization?
It depends on what kind of a system you're using. I presume you're talking about taxation forms or it also depends on how large your organization is. So that's very organizationally specific. I think at a minimum you need them to sign taxation forms. Okay. If you go on the CRA site, they can answer that question for you far better than I can. Because just look at raising, if you look at payroll under the CRA site, they don't call themselves CRA now, they have a new name. For a small organization, yes, you still need to complete the TD1, for example, I think it's called, which identifies the amount of taxation that you're withholding from that individual. And you need to, that information, that defines what your weekly, bi-weekly payroll will, hold back. So the other information that you need beyond that particular TD1 for provincial as well as federal, I think they're both covered off in the same form. But if you, I'm looking at the question that's coming in. So just check online with CRA and they'll give you all the information you need and know how to set up payroll for an individual on payroll.
Excellent. Thanks, Jan. This is an interesting question. And as we said earlier, if you have any other questions that you come up with throughout the session, please enter them in the question box. There's none currently in the queue, but we do have some stock questions to ask. So the next question is, can you fire someone because they are pregnant?
And the simplest answer is no, you can't fire them because they are pregnant. That doesn't mean you can't fire somebody who is pregnant. But the reason behind why you fire them in this case is all that matters here. And pregnancy is protected under the human rights legislation, both provincially and nationally, or federally. And therefore, if you fire somebody because they're pregnant and you don't think that they can complete the project, for instance, that they're on or something of that nature, then you are setting yourself up for a human rights charge. So the short answer is no, you can't fire them because they are pregnant, but you can certainly fire somebody when they're pregnant if the rationale is not their pregnancy.
Great, thanks, Jan. We've got another question here. What is progressive discipline? We are such a small organization. Why would we need a policy on that? Who does this? Is it a staff person or the board, such as the executive committee?
We're talking about a very key area in human resources, and that is managing people, and particularly managing them in a way that can lead to dismissal. Progressive discipline is a 5-step process that has been sanctioned by the courts as a minimum standard that employers must go through in order to dismiss somebody for cause. Now, it's getting a bit technical here because for cause does not necessarily apply in all dismissal situations. You may want to dismiss them because they're just not a good fit and they haven't worked out. And in that case, you don't need to go through a process of progressive discipline, particularly if it's during the probationary period. But if you've got somebody who is, you know, you not up to the job, not doing the job to the degree that you want, or their behavior is outside the norm, and you want to dismiss that person, then you need to go through the progressive dismissal process, which basically looks at, progressively more aggressive interaction with the individual. Aggressive is probably the wrong word, but robust interaction with the individual. So you start off by giving them a verbal reprimand. Then you move to a verbal and a formal verbal reprimand that you document. Then you move to a written reprimand, and then they get a warning, and then finally they get dismissed. So there is a step process that requires documentation. If you go online and Google progressive discipline, you'll get all kinds of information on it. In terms of who should handle progressive discipline, it depends on the organization and it depends on your governance policy. In most cases, organizations, if they're of any size, would have some kind of a personnel committee coming off their governance body. And that personnel committee would be the people I think you would need to advise. But if you are the senior person in the organization, you may have the right to discipline, probably should have the right to discipline as you choose or as you see fit. But you might want to advise them that you're on a program of progressive discipline, and this could potentially lead to dismissal.
Excellent. That was a really good question. So thank you to the individual that submitted that question. We're going to jump now to another one. How do you avoid perceptions of nepotism in hiring? And nepotism would just basically be treating someone a certain way because of their relationship or family connection or connection to, I guess, the higher ups or the hiring committee in an organization. So how do you avoid perceptions of nepotism?
It starts with having in place clear guidelines on how you recruit and hire and make selections. And I always recommend to organizations, regardless of how small they are, having a policy on recruitment and selection will serve them well. Particularly if it's an organization in a small community where there's a lot of interfamily connections and, often people know each other anyway. So you need a policy that adheres to what we call the merit principle. And the merit principle is essentially that you're hiring, the best person for the job. You determine that by, first of all, before you actually go to market, decide what you want in that job and in that person. What skills are you looking for? What abilities does that person have to have, or competencies do they have to have? What is their level of education? What experience are you looking for? And how do all of that combine into the job? Then I always recommend that people identify what I call key selection criteria. What are the key things that you are looking for, and how are you going to weight them in the process? And then you go through the process. If there's somebody that you are interviewing, or if there are people in the pool, you may want to ensure, or people in the pool that you are very familiar with or are related to you, you may want to ensure that you have on your selection panel an independent person, whether that's a member of your board or your committee or whatever. And that also will provide a perception of fairness. Then you treat every applicant exactly the same. Use the same questions. You can probe on questions, but you should start with the same questions. You go through a documented process of identifying who you're going to interview, who's on the short list, and who you finally accept. Document your references. You know, as long as you have things documented, as long as your process is fair and it's consistent, then you should be able to justify your decision making and thereby avoid you know, some of the fallout of perceived nepotism. Hope that helps.
Excellent. And moving on again, and I just want to say that you can add a question at any time to the question box. So we're just going to keep going through some questions we have prepared that come from many different areas. How can I improve staff retention in a nonprofit environment that is so dependent on funding?
That's a difficult question. I'm sure one that you all face, and people in the not-for-profit, if they're dealing with project funding, etc., that can be a very difficult thing. How do you improve staff, retain your staff? I think you start by recognizing that there's going to be turnover. No matter what you do, if you can provide security to employees, they're not going to necessarily stay with you. It depends on the individual. Some people don't need the same level of security as others. But you can improve the chances by making, okay, let me back up. The other thing you need to be aware of is what is the individual looking for in the job? What is their value proposition, we call it? What is important to them? And then try and address that in the job and as they perform with you. So maybe for some people, particularly younger people, opportunities to do new things, to be involved in a variety of things, have a lot of value for them. When you get into an older workforce, you may be looking at what are the benefits that I can have in an organization. So in which case, if you don't have benefits, then that may be a deal breaker for them. But there's no set formula as to how you improve staff retention. It depends on the organization. It depends on the individuals you have. But you can talk to them. You can communicate, and it comes back to that key element of communication and clarity. What are they looking for in the job? What's important to them? How do you achieve that in your organization? And being open with them. If they perceive you as not being upfront with them, you're going to lose their trust and they're going to move on. So often you can't increase their salary. Often you can't guarantee their salary more than 18 months or 6 months or whatever. If they know that, if they're buying into that, then, you know, there'll still be people who will move on. And you can't do anything about that. You can't force them to stay.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question is, how can I keep my employees engaged at work?
And that's similar to the comments that I just made. You know, keeping people engaged often is a factor in retaining them. Some of the things to think of around engagement is inclusion. People like to feel part of something, part of an organization. So how do you make them feel part of something? Do you have regular meetings with them, open door policies, recognition, you know, recognizing that what they've done well? How do you challenge them? And again, it comes back to what individuals are looking for, but generally people like challenge in their work. They like an opportunity to do new and different things. How much autonomy do they have? Because autonomy it doesn't mean that they can do anything they want. Autonomy means that within the framework of their job, they have an opportunity to make some decisions. They might choose to write a report a little different than you would, but that's important for engagement. Confidence. How can you build their confidence? That's where rewards come in. How do you provide them with the support they need? What is the meaning of this job for them? Is it, a short-term job while they're waiting to find something else? Is it that they are interested in your constituency, your client group? And how connected do they feel? These are some of the factors that you need to consider in creating engagement.
Excellent. I'm going to jump to another one here now. Can you fire an employee who's making the workplace toxic?
The short answer is yes, you can fire an employee. We can fire anybody. But firing usually refers to dismissal for cause. Firing can also simply refer to, dismissal. And so it depends on how you define that word. But if we assume that you're speaking of dismissal for cause, it can be very difficult to demonstrate that one person is responsible for the toxicity in any environment. So you start off by seeking first to understand what is the issue that's creating the workplace toxicity, or what is the issue with this individual. What feedback do you need from the people around him or her to ensure that that person has the most support they need? Why people don't usually get aggressive and negative unless their needs aren't being met. Can you, for example, provide feedback to that person and see if you can begin a process of progressive dismissal that we talked about earlier? It depends entirely on the nature of the environment, and the things that have set up the toxicity. It may not only be one person. It may be the communication system. It may be, that people are frightened for loss of their jobs. There's a whole host of reasons. So I'd be very careful on just selecting one person and firing them for cause without clear documentation.
That's a really, really interesting question and a difficult one, no doubt. But Jan did a fabulous job at that one as well. Another question. This is a good one. This came from someone within an organization, so it could be anybody. How do you handle touchy-feely, or some people may call it old-fashioned, it might not be with any intent, but how do you handle touchy-feely people in a workplace environment? And how do you approach the situation to say that maybe it's not appropriate or it makes you uncomfortable?
Communications. People need to feel that they have their space respected. And we all have a requirement for personal distance in our lives. So, we don't want others to necessarily touch us or hug us, or often, there are differences in families, let alone in the workplace. So I think the more open and more communication that occurs in the organization, the easier this one will be to deal with. But at a very minimum, people should feel that they can speak up and say, I do not like that behavior. If the individual doesn't change their behavior, then they need to be spoken to more forcefully. You need to, if you are the person who's experiencing it, you need to seek support from those around you, other people, and you need to report it to a supervisor. If you are the supervisor, you need to be aware that this can cause a lot of anguish and distress to the individual. Having a policy of respectful workplace is also very helpful in this regard, because it could be perceived, it could be categorized as personal harassment. And it doesn't have to be sexual in nature to be harassment. It can be personal harassment. A person feels uncomfortable because of something somebody else is doing. That's the definition of personal harassment. So if that's the case, and if you have, if you have a solid respectful workplace policy, you need to identify in that policy what the mechanisms are and open to others. And so it would start with, if it's one person to another person, those two people having a conversation, if possible. May need support from a supervisor to have that conversation, but they have the conversation to say, I do not want this. This is what you are doing, but they need to be specific and identify examples if possible. And they're supported by their supervisor in doing that. And then that individual, if they do not change, then you can certainly begin a process of, progressive discipline. But the other thing I would suggest is an education program with staff is critical here. And I note that there is an organization now, part of government, that is offering a training in respectful workplace.
Yes, I can speak to that.
And I'll ask Tina to speak to that.
So that's a great way to mention the upcoming free training session that we're having here at the Community Sector Council. We're going to be having an in-person respectful workplace workshop. It's a full day, and it's going to be on October 19th. We're just preparing the final details. Originally, we had it on the 18th, but there were some scheduling conflicts, so the 19th of October. And you will be able to register for that very soon on our website. It'll be here at the Community Sector Council, 25 Anderson Avenue, and this is yet another one of the really great opportunities, like today's opportunity, that we have as part of the Creative HR project that I'm working on here. And without the team and without people like Jan, without Darlene and the great support that we have here, we wouldn't be able to make this possible, especially, the great support from our funders as well. So we're going to take advantage of every opportunity we can. So if you'd like to hear more about Respectful Workplace, October 19th is a great day to drop by the Community Sector Council and register in advance, of course. We're going to go on now to our next question, and this question could be applicable in any nonprofit organization. What should you do if you're feeling burnout or your colleagues are feeling burnout in a nonprofit environment?
I'm willing to venture to say, Tina, that I suspect burnout is very common in nonprofit organizations, because there are so many demands and so many people coming at you at once. I think the first thing to do is recognize that it's happening. Pardon me, my voice is drying up here. Recognize that that you are feeling burnout, and that look at the reasons behind it. Have you had some vacation this year? People sometimes think that, well, I work around the clock and I don't need vacation is a good thing. It is not. It does lead to burnout in an organization. Take time off where you can and make sure you maximize the benefit of that. Sometimes a change of role may help, even if it's cross-functional exchange with another person. A new environment, a fresh outlook can perk people up and give them an opportunity to, feel differently about their environment. Burnout is generally caused by too much demand on the individual for the amount that they have available to give. And they need to recharge their batteries, as simple as that. So it could be taking time off, vacation time, or a leave of absence if it's really serious, but looking for support and assistance. And many organizations don't have employee assistance programs, which is unfortunate. But if you do have an employee assistance program, looking for support from that. And then analyzing why in your particular situation you are feeling the burnout. But it needs not to be ignored. That's the most important thing, because burnout can certainly lead to other mental health issues going forward if it's not addressed and recognized as a serious issue.
Great. And if I can for a minute, I'm just going to jump in there. And I'm sure Jan would agree. Avoiding burnout could be things as simple as taking your hour lunch break or getting outside the office on your hour lunch break. Not sitting through your lunch and eating at your desk. Like, we all care so much. We all, want to do everything possible and help and do everything great. But if you're not taking care of yourself, which could be during your lunch break or if you have breaks within your work schedule, taking the break, doing what you need to do, even if it's just as much as going across the road, like here, to go to McDonald's and get a coffee or a tea and just get a mental break from your normal day-to-day. I think that's something that over the years I've had to learn to do, and I'm sure there are a lot of others that are guilty of, just working, and not taking time for yourself. So even simple things, small steps can make a difference. The next question that we will go through, how do you best deal with really inappropriate people if a manager is not already dealing with them? So this could happen in a lineup at Tim Hortons or in a lineup at the grocery store. There are inappropriate people everywhere, but if they are in the workplace and they're not being, told that their behavior is inappropriate, how do you deal with that as one person?
You can, if you're comfortable, you can try addressing it directly with the individual. That's usually the most effective route. And be specific and provide examples. If you say to them, I don't think your behavior is appropriate because this is how it impacts me. And always bring it back to how it impacts you. If that doesn't work, then I think you need to raise it with the manager and explain to the manager how difficult this is, or for you, and look at suggesting perhaps a training program on organizational norms, some kind of a workshop that you might say, I want to put it together, and maybe we'll meet over lunch and talk about workplace norms. But generally, even when that is done, the individual still needs to be spoken to. And ideally, if you can do it yourself, it may have more impact. But then if that doesn't work, go to the manager and get their support in dealing with it. It's a communications thing around what is good behavior and what isn't. It's feedback to the employee. The manager should be providing that feedback, should be addressing it when it happens, and certainly should be addressing it in performance reviews. We're okay.
All right, so we're down to our final 9 minutes, and the time has absolutely flown by. I would love it if anyone have any other questions to type it in the question box now. We're going to keep going, but we will keep an eye on the question box. So a really great question is, what are the best ways to creatively reward employees in a nonprofit environment?
If you are in a business, or particularly a successful business, reward is often a multi-pronged approach, and usually it includes some form of compensation. In a not-for-profit, I dare say that that is off the table, but what you can do is reward through recognition. You can also, in some cases, you might be able to provide opportunities for doing different and new and different things, for allowing them opportunities to learn, opportunities to to maybe attend some external events that might be coming up, recognizing them through posting recognition awards or something of that nature. And an award might simply be, a card from Tim Hortons. Something that says, you have done a great job here, and we want to appreciate and recognize what you have done for us. And that can be a variety of things.
Could it even be something like, having a Friday off for the, recognized person, or like a free day off, or their birthday off, or something like that?
It could be, but there's a cautionary note. And the cautionary note is fairness. Do you do that for everybody in the organization, or are they then perceived as being unfairly recognizing one person over another in a more extensive way? A day off is substantial recognition. If all of your team or a part of your organization or team is working on a project and they have worked a lot of long hours and they've brought it to fruition, and you want to say thank you to them, you might want to give the whole team Friday afternoon off. But to do it for one and not for others, and you need to be careful of what you're setting up there in doing something like that.
All right, so we're switching gears here now. It's 10:55, and we will do one more question unless there are any others in the chat box. I'm going to pick one that's a little different. Do you have any suggestions for the best way to screen candidates when you're going through recruitment?
Yes, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. Screening candidates should be done on the basis of key selection criteria. What are you looking for in that particular person? If you're looking for techniques for screening candidates, usually people do their initial screening based on paper, because depending on the number of applications they receive, it would be very time consuming to do much else. So then you're looking at the resume, at the communications that you've received from them, as to whether or not you can see that they have the right education, right background, etc., to do this job, and if there's anything that stands out on their resume that makes them more attractive than anything else. So generally people do their initial screening that way. Second time round, or for the next level, the next level of screening might be a preliminary interview where you're touching on key ideas, key issues, key concepts that you are, would be deal breaker for you, and looking at what they want in the job, what's their value proposition, because that might give you a lot more information as to whether or not they would be a good fit long term. Consistency across the applicant pool is very important, and I tend to avoid gimmicks. Some people do gimmicky things when they're screening people. To me, it's not a valid or reliable methodology for screening. So I would strongly suggest you base it on your key selection criteria. I'm just looking at time here. I don't want us to run over. How much time do we have?
3 minutes. Okay, so we do have about 3 minutes left, so we will end it here just so that everyone can get on with their day at 11. We just want to thank you, Jen, so much for taking the time today to come here and provide some amazing responses to all of our questions. I'm actually sitting here in awe at the really great responses that Jen has come up with for us, so thank you. I also wanted to just alert you all about a really great document that's available on the Government of Newfoundland Labor Standards Division website, and it has to do with labor relations at work. So we've done a number of seminars now, online and in person, on employment standards. We do plan on doing yet another one, just so we can ensure people across Newfoundland and Labrador have access to this information. But if you wanted to go in and check out this document online, Jen would agree as well that this is an excellent resource if you're looking for some basic things about labor relations at work or employment relations at work. So thank you again. It's 10:58. We're going to end it off now. And if you have any further questions after we end this, or that you think about overnight, or when you have some free time, please reach out to us. We're always around, and we have a toll-free number on our website. cscnl.ca is the website. We'll be glad to talk with you. And thanks again, Jan, for a fabulous session. It was short, but it certainly flew by, but it was full of lots of rich information. So on behalf of all of us, thank you. And everyone have a great day. We'll be in touch, I'm sure, about some more great learning opportunities for the nonprofit sector. Thank you.